I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a sandwich place, eating lunch before heading back to work, when my phone went off with that sound. If you've ever gotten a real emergency alert, you know the one. It doesn't ring. It doesn't buzz. It screams, this flat electronic shriek that cuts through everything and makes your whole body clench before you even register what's happening. I grabbed my phone and read the screen. Emergency alert. Their eyes aren't real. That was it. No instructions. No affected area. No agency listed at the top the way those alerts usually show. Just those 5 words in the big block text the system uses, sitting there on my screen like it was telling me to seek shelter from a storm. I sat there for a second, rereading it. Then I checked the news. Nothing. I opened social media and searched for it and found a handful of posts from people in my county saying they'd gotten the same thing, and a few from the next county over, and at least one from a town about 40 miles north. All of them confused, all of them asking if anyone else had gotten it. I texted my friend Ren, who lived on the other side of town, and asked if she'd seen it. She called me instead of texting back. "Yeah," she said. "What does that mean?" I told her I didn't know. By the time I got back to work, the alert was gone. Not just cleared from the notification bar, gone from the alert history entirely, the same way a text disappears when the other person unsends it. Like the system had reached back into my phone and pulled it out. The posts online were still there, from people who'd screenshotted it in time, but the official record of it had vanished. I screenshotted everything I could find and tried not to think about it for the rest of the afternoon. I mostly failed. The thing is, I probably would have written it off eventually. A glitch, a prank, somebody with access to the system who thought they were being funny. Those things happen. I had almost talked myself into that version of events by the end of the week, but I couldn't stop seeing it. Not the alert. I mean in people, out in the world. It started the day after, at the grocery store. A woman in the produce section smiled at me when I reached past her for something, one of those polite stranger smiles, and I smiled back. And then I looked at her eyes, and something in the back of my skull made a sound like a struck tuning fork. I can't describe it more precisely than that. Something about the way her eyes moved was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not horror movie wrong, just slightly, almost imperceptibly wrong. Like watching a video that's a single frame out of sync with the audio. You know something's off before you can identify what. I looked away and finished shopping and told myself I was being paranoid. Then I mentioned it to Ren, and she went quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I thought it was just me." She'd seen it too. A man outside the laundromat on her street who turned to look at her before she'd made any noise coming around the corner. A teenager at the bus stop whose eyes hadn't moved when a car backfired nearby, when every other person on the block had flinched. We agreed it was probably nothing. We agreed we were probably both a little unsettled by the alert and looking for things that weren't there. Then Ren found the drill site. She handled records for a county office and had a habit of going down research rabbit holes when something caught her attention. A few days after the alert, she called me and said she'd found a geothermal drilling permit filed about 4 months back for a site on the edge of town, Out past the old grain storage facilities, the company had started drilling, hit something unexpected at depth, and quietly wrapped up the project without filing a completion report. No explanation, no follow-up. They'd just left. We drove out there on a Saturday morning. The site was fenced off with standard orange construction fencing and a generic sign about authorized personnel. No equipment, no trucks, no workers. The fence looked new. The hole in the ground did not. It was wide, maybe 20 feet across, with a metal collar around the rim that the drill crew had put in. The air coming up from it was warm and dry, which didn't make sense for a hole in the ground, and it had a smell that I still can't properly name. Not bad, exactly, just deeply unfamiliar, like the smell of a place that had never had any weather. We shone a flashlight down into it, and the beam disappeared before it hit anything. We didn't go in. We went home, and Ren got back on her computer, and 2 hours later she called me again and said she'd found a name on the drilling permit. Site foreman, guy named Croft. She'd already found a number and called it. He'd already agreed to meet us. Croft was a quiet, solid guy who looked like he'd spent most of his life doing physical work. We met at a diner about 20 miles from town, which had been his suggestion, and he was already there when we arrived, with a coffee he'd barely touched. He didn't waste time getting into it. He told us that his crew had broken through into open space at depth about 3 months ago. Not a cavern, not a natural pocket. Open space, enormous and structured, with warm air rising up through the drill shaft, and no explanation for why the temperature down there was what it was. They dropped a camera on a line, and the footage had shown them the tops of buildings. Not natural formations. Buildings. Stone structures, dense and regular, spreading out in every direction past what the camera could capture. His company had told him to pack up and go. No explanation, just a call from someone 3 rungs above his direct supervisor, telling him the project was complete and to get his crew out. He'd asked questions. He'd been told, politely and then less politely, to stop asking questions. 3 of his crew members had gone down before the order came to leave. They'd rigged a line and descended out of curiosity, the same way anyone would, and they'd come back up about 2 hours later, physically fine. No injuries, no apparent distress. They'd said the city was enormous and empty and that nothing had happened down there. But they were different after that. I asked him what he meant. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at the table for a second. You ever talk to somebody on the phone when the signal's bad, he said, and there's this tiny delay between when you talk and when they respond, like a half second where things are just slightly out of step. He looked up. That's what it was like talking to them after. Everything just a little bit off. They said the right things, they acted like themselves, but something about the timing was wrong. Ren asked about the eyes. Croft looked at her. Yeah, he said. The eyes. He told us that he'd noticed it about a week after they came back up. He'd been talking to one of them, a guy named Pelter, who he'd worked with for 6 years, and the light in the room had shifted when a cloud moved outside the window. Every person in that room had adjusted, squinting or blinking or glancing toward the window. Pelter hadn't. His eyes had stayed exactly the same, fixed and still, like a photograph of eyes rather than actual eyes. Croft had started watching after that. The pupil didn't track the way it should. It didn't respond to changes in light the way a real pupil does. It was close. It was very, very close. But it wasn't right. He'd started researching emergency alert systems after that. He had credentials through a county emergency management position he'd taken after the drilling job. It had taken him 2 weeks to figure out how to send a mass alert and another week to convince himself to do it. He deleted it remotely when he realized it could be traced back to him. "I didn't know what else to do," he said. "I didn't know who to call. I still don't." Wren asked him where Pelter and the other two were now. Croft said they'd gone back to their lives, back to their families, their neighborhoods, their routines. Pelter lived about 12 miles from where we were sitting. The other two were in towns he named that were both within an hour's drive. He paid for his own coffee and left before we finished ours. Wren and I sat there for a while, without talking. Then she said, "We should go back to the site." I said okay. We went the next morning, earlier this time, while it was still grey out. The fence had been cut while we were gone, neatly, with something sharp, right down one of the vertical posts. Whoever had done it had leaned it back in place so it looked intact from the road. We went down, not far. We weren't brave enough or stupid enough to go all the way, but we went far enough, maybe 40 feet, climbing down the metal rungs that the drill crew had put in the collar, to where the shaft widened and the air thickened with that strange dry warmth. Far enough that when we shone our light straight down, we could see, at the very edge of visibility, the pale, flat tops of the structures below. The city was real. Whatever Croft had described, it was real. From where we were, it looked enormous and still and pale, like something built out of old bone. Then Wren grabbed the back of my jacket. "Look," she said. I looked where she was pointing, angling my flashlight down at a sharper angle. On what appeared to be a wide street between two of the larger structures, there was a figure, upright, moving slowly, and even from that distance and in that dark, it was oriented toward us, toward the opening of the shaft, 2 miles above its head, looking up. We climbed out, fast. We drove back into town without talking much, and I dropped Wren off and went home and sat in my kitchen for a long time. I kept thinking about Croft's 3 crew members, 3 people who'd gone down into that city and come back up and gone home to their lives. 3 months ago, living in houses, eating meals, going to work, and the eyes not quite right, the timing just slightly off. 3 that Croft knew of. The thing that kept getting me was the scale of what was down there. What Croft had described, what I'd glimpsed in that shaft. That wasn't a small space. That was a city. Cities don't get built for 3 people. They don't get built for 30 people. Whatever lived down there, there were a lot of them, and they'd been there long enough to build something that made our architecture look temporary by comparison. I thought about the alert again. Their eyes aren't real. Not its eyes. Not an eye. There. Plural. Already plural before anyone had noticed anything. I needed to buy something that evening, a small thing, and I stopped at a gas station on my way back from dropping Wren off. The attendant behind the counter was someone I half recognized from around town. I paid, and when he handed back my change, I looked at his eyes the way Croft had described. the way I'd been half-consciously doing for days. I watched the light. The overhead fluorescents were the kind that hum slightly and cast everything in a flat white. When I moved to my left, putting the overhead light at a slightly different angle, my own eyes adjusted. I could feel them doing it, the small, involuntary shift. His didn't. The pupils sat there, round and dark and perfect and completely still, like someone had painted an eye on his face and gotten every detail right except the part where eyes respond to the world around them. I put my change in my pocket and said thanks and walked to my car at the speed of someone who was not thinking about what he'd just seen. I drove home. I locked the door. I sat with it for a long time. Here's what I keep coming back to. The city down there is enormous. Whatever those things are, they've had that city for a very long time, long enough to build it, long enough to know it completely, long enough to understand what lives above them. They sent 3 people back up with Croft's crew and nobody noticed for weeks. Weeks. And when someone finally did notice, the only thing that gave them away was something so small that you had to be looking for it, specifically in the right light, to catch it at all. They're getting better at it. That's what I keep thinking. The ones Croft spotted were early. They'd had a few weeks. The ones I'm seeing now have had months. The adjustments are smaller. The timing is tighter. The eyes are closer to right than they were. And whatever they want, they're not in a hurry. That's the part that takes the most getting used to. In the stories, things that come from underground want to destroy something, or take something, or scare you into leaving. These things don't seem interested in any of that. They go to work. They buy groceries. They stand in lines at the gas station and hand back your change without the pupil moving in the light. They're learning. They're practicing. They're doing it so gradually and so carefully that Croft is the only person I know of who noticed on his own. And he only noticed because he'd been in that shaft and had a reason to be watching. I've started watching differently now. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone would notice. Just paying attention. Just looking at the eyes when I'm close enough. When the light is right. Most people are fine. Most people are exactly what they look like. But every few days, someone isn't. And I don't say anything. I don't know what I'd say. I don't know who I'd say it to. Croft tried the emergency alert system and got exactly as far as a screenshot on a stranger's phone before it was deleted. There's no version of this where I call someone official and it goes anywhere good. So I watch, I check the eyes, I keep the information to myself. There's a city 2 miles below the ground I walk on every day, and it's been there longer than anyone alive has known about it. And whatever built it has been patient enough to wait this long. Patient enough to move slowly. Patient enough to practice until they almost have it right. Almost. That's the only thing I have left. That almost. That single small flaw in an otherwise perfect copy. I don't know how much longer it'll hold.